Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're not just looking at history, we're breaking down the political playbook of India's very first superpower, the Mauryan Empire. We're going to look at two radically different strategies that defined its incredible rise and its ultimate collapse.
So, let's just dive right into the core question. What really holds an empire together? Is it raw power, or is it something more, like piety? We're going to explore this by examining two master strategists who built, and maybe even broke, one of the ancient world's greatest powers.
Okay, so picture this. It's 326 BC. The Indian subcontinent is pretty much dominated by the Nanda Empire. And these guys were so powerful, so feared, that even Alexander the Great's battle-hardened army basically said, "No way," and mutinied rather than face them. But when Alexander retreated, he left behind a massive power vacuum, leaving the whole region ripe for a takeover.
Now, the guy who decides to step into this chaos isn't a king or a general. He's a master political strategist, a brilliant thinker named Chanakya. He looked at the powerful Nanda Empire and didn't see an invincible force. No, he saw a corrupt, weak dynasty that was ready to fall. He had the vision, the blueprint for a new empire, but he needed someone to execute the plan.
In that blueprint, it was all laid out in his masterpiece, the Arthashastra. You have to understand, this wasn't some philosophical text about morality. This was basically The Prince on steroids, written 1,000 years before Machiavelli. It was a cold, calculated guide to getting and keeping power by any means necessary. And to wield this weaponized knowledge, he found the perfect protege, a young, hungry, ambitious man named Chandragupta Maurya.
Their strategy was just ruthlessly efficient. Step 1. Chanakya trains Chandragupta, turning him from a nobody into a leader. Step 2. Instead of a frontal assault, they play it smart. They build a coalition, turning the Nanda's enemies into their friends. And only then, once all the pieces were in place, did they make their move, seizing the capital in 321 BC and establishing their own empire. Classic.
And it worked beautifully. With Chanakya as his prime minister, the brains of the operation, Chandragupta's reign was a massive success, all guided by the cold, hard logic of the Arthashastra. He even beat one of Alexander the Great's own generals to secure the borders, cementing the Mauryan Empire as the new superpower on the block.
So, fast forward a bit. Chandragupta's son, Bindusara, has a pretty stable, uneventful reign. But then, he dies, and all hell breaks loose. A massive succession crisis erupts. And out of more than 100 sons, one of them stands out for his absolute, sheer ruthlessness. A guy named Ashoka.
And here's the thing, Ashoka was the underdog. His own father, Bindusara, apparently couldn't stand him and never wanted him on the throne. Ashoka's mother was a commoner, not royalty, so he was kind of looked down on. But despite all that, he was a brilliant administrator and had this burning ambition for power.
The second his father dies, Ashoka makes his move. He rushes to the capital, seizes control, and what follows is a bloody 4-year civil war, where he allegedly, and this is just brutal, eliminates nearly all of his rivals. We're talking about rumors of 99 of his own half-brothers being killed.
His early years as emperor were so savage, so drenched in violence and terror, that leader historians gave him a nickname that just sends a shiver down your spine: Chand Ashoka, which means Ashoka the Cruel.
And here's the key strategic point. This wasn't random anger. This was policy. This was a calculated tool of statecraft. For 7 years, he perfected the art of ruling through absolute fear, allegedly building torture chambers so terrifying they were called Ashoka's Hell. He was taking Chanakya's playbook and turning the volume up to 11.
Then came the one campaign that would change everything: the conquest of Kalinga. It was the last major independent kingdom standing in his way, a final piece of the puzzle he needed to totally dominate the subcontinent.
The war itself was a brutal, overwhelming success for Ashoka's war machine. But the cost, my goodness, the cost was staggering. 100,000 people killed in the fighting, and another 150,000 taken away as captives. The devastation was just immense.
Now, according to Ashoka's own version of events, the official story he had carved into stone pillars all across his empire, seeing this carnage changed him completely. The guy who supposedly killed his own brothers suddenly felt remorse for the very first time. He publicly announced that the whole war was a huge mistake. So he does a complete 180. He converts to Buddhism, renounces all violence, and he rolls out a totally new imperial operating system. He replaces the hard power doctrine of the Arthashastra with this new policy he called Dhamma, basically a soft power ideology of moral and ethical rule for his entire empire.
But as strategists, we have to ask the question, was this a real spiritual awakening, or was this the most brilliant public relations pivot in ancient history? Was this a new way to manage a massive, sprawling empire, not with a sword, but with a unifying idea?
And this is where things get really murky, because the evidence just doesn't quite line up. You've got these two competing stories. On one hand, you've got Ashoka the Saint, promoting peace, sending Buddhist missionaries everywhere. But then you look at other sources and you see Ashoka the Sinner. Some historians point out that his big apology edicts were placed near the capital, like propaganda, not out on the borders. Other texts claim that years after his conversion, he ordered a massacre of 18,000 people from a rival sect. It just doesn't add up.
So, what was the final verdict on this new strategy? Let's analyze the long-term results. How did this new blueprint of governance by morality, whether it was heartfelt or just cold calculation, how did it actually perform for the empire?
Well, after Ashoka's really long 38-year reign, the empire he held together with his new ideology, it started to fracture almost the second he died. He was followed by a whole series of weaker rulers who just couldn't hold it all together, and pretty soon, territories started breaking away.
And this really exposes the core strategic problem his successors were facing. The entire Mauryan state was built on military might, and that requires a huge, expensive army. But when your official state policy becomes nonviolence, it gets a lot harder to justify funding that army. It seems his new playbook may have accidentally defunded its own security system, leaving the empire vulnerable. The end, when it finally came, was just dripping with irony. It wasn't some foreign invader who took them down. The threat came from within. The very last Mauryan emperor was assassinated by his own top general in the middle of a military parade. The same army that had built the empire, now feeling weak and neglected, was the very instrument of its destruction.
Which leaves us with one last big question. Which political playbook was actually more effective? Was it the ruthless, cold pragmatism of Chanakya that built an entire empire from nothing? Or was it the grand moral rebrand of Ashoka, which gave the empire its golden age, but might have planted the very seeds of its destruction?